Thank you, and it's good to see you. Very happy to see you. It's a joyful occasion to see you. I enjoy teaching. I appreciate your presence, and I am honored to be able to talk to you about the great and the marvelous things of a living God. It's truly great. During this special series that we're working with at the present time, it is called The Altars and Offerings Under the Most High. It begins in the Old Testament, concludes in the New Testament, showing how they actually synchronize, that the two are really one book called the Bible. And that all the offerings and the altars of the Old Testament typify very strongly the Lord Jesus Christ. And so we will be teaching you on those. Among the studies will be the birth of the altars and offerings to the Most High, and we have delivered those already. We will be dealing with the Patriarchs' offerings, and that will we be dealing with during this session. And then we have a nation makes an altar. God moved from one person, like Abraham, to you and to your house, to a nation called Israel, to the whole nation. It's beautiful how the worship moved from a person to a nation. And we will be discussing that and showing the means of worship at that time, and how you could actually make a sacrifice for a nation as well as you could for a person. And among these lessons, we will be teaching about the burnt offering sacrifice, the sin and trespass offerings, the peace offerings, the wave offerings, the accident offerings, the maybe offerings. You're especially like that one. And the offering of sacrifice of praise, the meal offering, and so forth. And so we're getting into them, and I hope that you are enjoying them. Today's lesson, the Patriarchs' offering. Now, we must begin in the beginning. We have Adam and Eve, then we had Abel, their son. Abel knew about these very special times of worship called offering and offering unto God. He learned this from his parents, Adam and Eve. They learned it from God. When they saw God take a couple of little animals and make skins for their own clothing, to make them an offering of love unto Adam and Eve, and that their nakedness might be covered. And the children saw that, and and if they didn't see it at that moment, they heard about it, reiterated by their parents. And so Abel understood the truth regarding the offerings of God from his father, Adam. He had been taught that the innocent could stand in the place of the guilty, and the guilty could be forgiven of his sins because of the innocent blood being offered unto God. And so he understood this. He had heard of the one who would come and bruise the serpent's head. That's in Genesis 3:15. That was a promise and commitment that God made to Eve in the day that they were moved from the garden. And it says, and your seed shall bruise his head, and the Lucifer will bruise his heel. Well, on Calvary, the heel of the Messiah was bruised, and the head of the serpent was destroyed. Jesus Christ rose from the dead, which smashed the strength of Lucifer, and he said, I have the keys of death and hell. He was the conqueror. And so that's what he's talking about. In Genesis 4:4, it says, Abel brought of the firstlings of his flock and of the fat thereof, and the Lord had respect unto Abel and to his offering. And God carries that on further in the book of Hebrews. In the book of Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 4, there's a continuation of the speaking of this man Abel. It says, by faith Abel. Now you see, that's very strong, that it was a matter of faith that caused him to do it. By faith Abel offered unto God a more excellent sacrifice than Cain, by which he obtained witness that he was righteous. He became righteous through the offerings that he made. And God testifying of his gifts, and by it he being dead yet speaketh. So very early in the history and the story of man, we learn of the great truths of bringing an offering unto God upon an altar, and what it meant. And Abel knew that in the garden that God made this provision for his parents, Adam and Eve, and then he continued it by making an altar unto God and bringing of the firstling of his flock. You see, the firstlings of his flock, and he offered them unto the Lord. And it says that that it says in Hebrews there that it was an excellent sacrifice. An excellent sacrifice, that it was acceptable unto God, and that God called that faith, that God entered into the thing with him and said, now this is faith. That is living faith. Now, how did Abel know about offering this certain sacrifice and that it was necessary for him to do that? This he could not imagine. This he could not in his own mind conceive. It came to him through his parents. It was the most talked about subject in his house, I am sure. And the story, no doubt, was told every day of how they lost the Garden of Eden, how God clothed them with these garments from innocent little animals, and how they must now make a sacrifice for sins in order to have their sins forgiven. So not only did his parents have clothes made from the skins of animals, but he and his brother Cain were given some such clothes of innocent animals themselves. The whole family was clothed them. And so they were taught this was the cleansing of the conscience of a human being. That through this, the man's sins could be remitted, his bad things that he had done could be forgiven, and it was the cleansing of the conscience of the human person in this manner, and so they obeyed and did as God told them. You say, when was it to be offered, such an offering? In those days, before Moses, we do not know of any special holy days or particular offerings, because we don't have the written record of those times. When we get to heaven, we might discover that they had it precisely right from the time of Adam right straight through, but it wasn't written down until Moses' day. It was a ritual ordained of God, and of which God spoke and said it was an excellent and pleasing and acceptable sacrifice unto him. So that made it a very beautiful thing. And at the moment, we do not know whether they did this once a month or once a year, or how they might have done it until Moses' day. Then we come to understand when those things took place. The offering was to be presented to God after the same manner in which Adam had been taught in the Garden of Eden. And so God had a precise manner in which this was done. And so they had to obey whatever God had told them to do. Now, this went on for a great number of generations. In those days, people lived to be almost 1,000 years of age. That was before man's age was cut back. But by the time we get to Noah, we see the same thing happening as 2,000 years before. Now, that's a long time. 2,000 years is a very long time. It takes us from here back to the time of Christ. And from Adam unto Noah is about 2,000 years. And so it's a thing that continued on as God had prescribed it, as God had ordained that it should be, until when we come into Noah's times, we find that he had a prophetic altar and that he had an offering to make unto God. We read of this in Genesis chapter 8 and verse 20. It says, Noah built an altar unto the Lord, unto Jehovah, and took of every clean beast and of every clean fowl, and offered burnt offerings on the altar. Here the patriarch Noah, when he had been delivered, you see, by the power of God, he emerged from the ark, having changed from a pre-diluvian person to a post-diluvian person. He had gone through the great flood. He had observed the world in catastrophe, submerged, a world submerged with water, and there was no living thing left after that time. And so his first thought when he came out of that ark, after God had preserved him from the time of the pre-diluvian age to the post-diluvian age with the great flood in between them, that the first thing he must do was to build an altar and to make a sacrifice unto the Most High God. And it says he built that altar in Genesis 8 and 20. He built that altar, and he offered of every clean beast and of every clean fowl, he offered a burnt offering on that altar unto the great and the living God. What a mighty display of worship as he took of every clean beast that God had prescribed as being clean. And that means it wasn't a pig, or an unclean animal of that nature, but as a lamb or as a young cow, ox, or something or another, the kind of meat that we eat, you see, that become our blood in our own bloodstream. The ones that were unclean, he was not permitted to use. They were not permitted to use them for sacrifices. But of every clean beast and every clean bird, he offered a sacrifice unto God. And on the breast of the cloud, you know, as the great flood was clearing away, on the breast of the cloud, he observed and saw the scintillating and dazzling rainbow as it was born. It was born on the bosom of a magnificent cloud, the first one that human beings had ever seen, because there had never been a moment like that before. Before that time, the earth had been watered with water that came up from the earth, a moisture that came up from the earth. Now it was being watered by water that came down. And so that changed the whole world. It may have created the Antarctica and the Arctic. It may have created the coldness of Siberia and the heat and the heat of the tropics. We don't know exactly what all took place. It might have thrown the world clear off its axis. It might have created many of the things that the scientists are studying under this day. But on the breast of that cloud was a rainbow, and it was born on that day. The voice of God was heard, and it was clear that this offering that Noah was making was accepted by God, and that the rainbow was the eternal seal of the covenant between man and God, or between God and man. In Genesis 9 and 8, it says, God said unto Noah and to his sons with him, saying, Behold, I establish my covenant with you, and with your seed after you, and with every living creature that is with you, of the fowl, of the cattle, of the beast of the earth with you. Isn't that amazing that God made covenants not only with man, but with the beasts also? From all that go out of the ark to every beast of the earth, and I will establish my covenant with you. Neither shall all flesh be cut off any more by the waters of a flood, neither shall there any more be a flood to destroy the earth. That was God's covenant, God's promise. And God said, This is the token of the covenant which I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you. Isn't that strong? That God not only made it with Noah, he made it with every living creature, it says here. He says, for perpetual generations. For perpetual generations. Hey, they're still going on right now. Perpetual generations. Verse 13 says, I set my bow in the cloud, and it shall be for a token, or a sign, of a covenant between me and the earth. And so when he made that great offering and that great sacrifice, and God put the rainbow in the cloud, he was learning how to offer his offerings unto God, how to make an altar unto God, and this created a covenant. You see, when you have offerings and altars, you have covenants. God's always talking to you. God's always doing things. And God is always enriching us. It's a time of tremendous greatness and marvelous dignity. When God speaks to us, and new things are being born, and new relationships are coming into being. Oh, it's a happy time. It is a great time. And so these patriarchs, first we gave you Abel and his altar, then we bring you to Noah and his altar of every clean beast. He offered a tremendous offering unto God. Even though there was only his family present, he offered a tremendous offering unto God. And for the sake of time, shall we go down 10 generations? And there's a man named Abraham. Now that is not far removed. Maybe you don't realize it, but every one of us span 5 generations. We all span 5 generations. You know your grandfather, and you know your father, and you know yourself, and you know your son, and you know your grandson. You see, every man stands in the middle of 5 generations. And so there were only 2 of those between the time of Noah and the time of Abraham. Just 2 of them. And so let us go to Abraham's day and see what he was doing when it was related to what God wanted man to do in the area of offerings and in sacrifices. Abraham entered into the altars and offerings of God to be made by the Most High. In Genesis 12 and 8, it says he removed from thence unto the mountain on the east of Bethel, and pitched his tent there, and having Bethel on his west, and Hai on the east, and there he built an altar unto the Jehovah, and called upon the name of Jehovah. So there is the beginnings of the great revelation of God that flowed through Abraham. And there was his altar that he made unto God. God had told him to do it, and he tells you the exact point and spot. When we take our group to the Holy Land, we pass by Bethel. It's over to the right of us. There's not much over there, but just kind of a wasteland right now with a few Arab houses, but not much over there. And that was a place where he offered his offering on his sacrifice to God. Then Genesis 13:4 says, under the place of the altar, it had a place, which he had made there at the first. And there Abraham called on the name of the Lord. So under that place where he had made an altar before, he came back and he made another sacrifice unto God on that altar as he had previously. So that shows you the continuing operation, you see, of making altars and sacrifices unto God. This was through the man Abraham, the patriarch. In Genesis 13 and 18, it says, Abraham removed his tent, came and dwelt in the plain of Mamre. Now that's down to the further south around Hebron. And which is in Hebron. The Bible tells you where it is, in Hebron. And there he built an altar unto the Jehovah. And so under his God again, he built another altar. He had other sacrifices. And so this wasn't, what we're trying to show you, was not a one-time thing for a whole life. It was a continuing relationship and fellowship with God. And that as he grew in God, he also grew in his altars and in his sacrifices under the Most High. And through these altars and sacrifices, and we showed you in a former lesson that most of these were praise and adulation and thanksgiving to God, and were not sin offerings. That some people have always thought that the offering was always related to sin. It was not. And it was often related to rejoicing, related to praising, relating to thanksgiving unto the Most High God. And so we want you to do the same. Not only come to God when you're a sinner, but come to Him when you're not a sinner, praising and thanking Him for all the good things that He has done for you and for your life. In Genesis 22, verse 2, it says, and he said, now take thy son, God was speaking to Abraham, thine only son, Isaac, whom thou lovest, and get thee unto the land of Moriah. That's in the heart of Jerusalem, where the Mosque of Omar is standing right now. And there's a big, big rock that you could put 50 people in down below. They have carpets down there and all kinds of things there right now. It's a very big place. And that's where he went, to the rock Moriah. And get thee into the land of Moriah. Offer him, that was his son Isaac, as a burnt offering upon one of the mountains which I will tell thee of. God said He would tell him which one it was. Verse 3, and Abraham rose up early in the morning, saddled his ass, took 2 of his young men with him, and Isaac his son, and clave the wood for the burnt offering, rose up, and went to the place which God had told him, to the place where God had told him. And there, on the third day, walking with a donkey was not very fast, I lifted up his eyes and saw the place afar off. And Abraham said unto the young men, abide here with the ass, and I and the lad will go yonder and worship and come again to you. That was real faith, you know. He's going to bring that boy back. He was sure of it. And he was going to bring him back. Even though God had said, make him an offering, he knew He was going to bring him back. He said, we'll come back to you. Abraham took the wood and of the burnt offering and laid it upon his Isaac, his son, and took the fire in his hand and a knife, and they went both of them together. And Isaac spake unto Abraham his father, said, Father, my father. He said, here am I, my son. And he said, behold the fire and the wood. Where is the lamb for the burnt offering? He already knew how to offer an offering unto God. The little kid did, you see? What I wanted to show you was that this is not something that God just did one time with Adam and Eve. This was a continuing thing right straight to the Lord Jesus Christ, who became the great supreme offering of all times unto all beings on the face of this earth. And verse 8 says, Abraham said, my son, God will provide Himself a lamb for the burnt offering. So they went on together. And they came to the place which God had told him of, and Abraham built an altar and laid the wood in order, and and bound Isaac his son, and laid him on the altar and upon the wood. Isn't that something? And Abraham stretched forth his hand, took the knife to slay his son. We've often seen the artist's conception of that dramatic moment in history when Abraham had already been told that through Isaac, all the nations of the earth would be blessed, that through Isaac, all the promises that God had made to him would be fulfilled. And here he was at a crisis moment when God said, give me your son. Give me your son. I'll talk a little more about that in a moment. And the angel of the Lord called unto him out of heaven, said, Abraham, Abraham. No, verse 10 says, Abraham stretched forth his hand and took the knife to slay his son. And then the angel of the Lord said, Abraham, Abraham. He said, here am I. And he said, lay not thine hand upon the lad, neither do thou anything unto him, for now I know that thou fearest me. God was searching for true dedication, true love. Seeing that thou hast not withheld thy son, thine only son, from me. And Abraham lifted up his eyes. He looked and beheld a ram caught in a thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram. Now, the ram wasn't there a few moments before, because he would have seen him there. You know, you can't help seeing a ram if you know, around you. But one was there now. And he took the ram, offered him up for a burnt offering instead of the son. And verse 14, and Abraham called the name of that place Jehovah Jireh. That's the way we get the names of God, by the miracles that he performed. And as it is unto this day, in the mount of the Lord, it shall be seen. Now this is the day through the smoke of the sacrifice that Abraham offered that day upon the altar, that Abraham looked to the north of his altar, which is at Mount Moriah, and he saw a hill called Golgotha, or Calvary. It didn't have that name in his day. Over 1,000 years before it took place, he saw three crosses. And God said, Abraham, the person in the middle is my son. You keep your son, take him home with you. I will give you my son, and he shall be the sacrifice for the total world. You see, how do you know that? Because Jesus says in John 8:56, your father Abraham rejoiced to see my day. He saw it and was glad. Abraham was the first person who ever saw the salvation of the world because of an altar and a sacrifice. You see, God must have loved that man. God must have really have loved that man to let him be the first one who ever saw Calvary. In that moment and in that day, they didn't even have crucifixion as a means of death. And so he saw a new means of killing people. He saw it. Jesus said he saw it. Jesus not only said he saw it, he was glad. When he heard the words, it is finished, from the man in the middle, God spoke to him and said, he has just spoken the redemption of the total of mankind. He's finished the job. He has become the sacrifice upon my altar to save the whole world. Hey, when that man went back home, he had a story to tell that nobody would believe. You get a revelation from God, and you're not going to find many people that believe you either. You have a talk with Jesus and get something different from Montgomery Ward's catalog and different from the late night news and the early morning news, and you're going to be different from everybody else. You're going to be different. And you won't find it easy to convince them that you've had a relationship with God, you've had a communion with God, and you know something. What I'm trying to show you in these lessons is that the whole of the Bible symmetrically flows together as one. And what God started in the Garden of Eden was climaxed on Mount Calvary. And that all between there are equal, that all between there contributed one to the other. How actually beautiful it is, how magnificent it is. The important thing is for you to receive the offering of God, the Lord Jesus Christ, upon the altar of God, which is Mount Calvary. It's important that you receive it. Jesus said, if any man tries to get to heaven any other way, he is a thief and a robber. You can't get there any other way. This is the only way to the heart of God, through what he began in the Garden of Eden, an offering offered unto him, and clothing to clothe one's nakedness, spiritual nakedness, moral nakedness, that be clothed in the name of his Son, the Lord Jesus Christ. We want you to receive that right now. We want you to be happy with it. We want you to be cleansed by his mighty power. We want the offerings and the altars of God to be very closely related to your life. We do want that, and we just want you to be blessed. If you're not sure that you're sure and positive that you're positive and know that you know, we want you to get that way right now. Now, Lord Jesus Christ, I ask you this moment to come into the heart of my neighbor and my friend, forgive them of their sins and cleanse them from all unrighteousness. Your word has said that if we if we confess with our lips and believe in our hearts that we're saved. So we right now confess that we're sinners. We believe in our hearts that God raised Jesus Christ from the dead, and through this we receive our salvation. Receive right now the Lord Jesus Christ into your heart in His name.